I remember the exact moment when everything changed. My heart had stopped, and I slipped into a silence that no human word can describe. I was not in my hospital bed anymore. I was floating in a darkness that felt alive, heavy but strangely calm. For a few seconds, or maybe an eternity, time didn't exist there. I thought this was it. Death had come, and everything we teach, everything I had preached for decades, was about to be tested. I was a rabbi, a teacher of Torah, a defender of tradition. I believed I knew the truth about the Messiah. I had built my entire life on it. And yet, in that strange space between life and death, I learned I was wrong. The first thing I sensed was presence. Not just a presence, but the presence. I had spoken about God thousands of times, read the words of the prophets, argued and debated about faith. But what I felt in that moment was not a theological idea. It was overwhelming reality. A love so vast it stripped me of every mask, every excuse, every layer of pride. And then I saw him. He was standing before me, not in the way we imagine in paintings or stained glass, but in a light that seemed to be made of both fire and peace at once. His eyes pierced through me, yet they did not condemn me. They revealed me. Every lie I had told myself, every sermon I gave without conviction, every time I had chosen ritual over love, it was all there, exposed. And yet, instead of crushing me, that gaze lifted me. And then he spoke. His voice wasn't sound, it was truth vibrating inside my soul. He said, "You have taught about the Messiah, but you did not recognize him when he came. You were waiting for power, for conquest, for a kingdom of men. But the kingdom is not of this world. It is within." I wanted to argue instinctively. My rabbinic mind had been trained to debate, to dissect scripture, to demand proof. But in that place, there was no argument strong enough to stand against his presence. The truth was undeniable. He was the Messiah we had been waiting for, and we had rejected him. The weight of that realization crushed me. Imagine devoting your life to teaching a truth, only to discover you had been guarding the wrong door all along. I thought of my students, of the community that looked to me for guidance. I thought of how many times I had dismissed Jesus as a false teacher, a distortion of Judaism. And yet here he was, alive, radiant, undeniable. He continued, "You prayed with your lips, but your heart was far. You built walls around God when I came to tear them down. You looked for law, but I came to give life. And you knew the scriptures, but you missed me." I remembered the passages I had avoided, the prophecies that had always unsettled me. Isaiah's suffering servant. Daniel's vision of the Son of Man coming on the clouds. The psalm that spoke of hands and feet pierced. I had explained them away like many rabbis do, finding clever interpretations that kept Jesus out of the picture. But standing before him, all those interpretations crumbled like paper in fire. And then came the most shocking part. He said, "You will go back. You will live again, but not for yourself. Speak what you have seen. Tell them the Messiah is not a myth, not a metaphor. I am he. And I have always been with you." At that moment I felt something like a current of light flow through me, pulling me back. I gasped, and suddenly I was in my hospital bed again, doctors shouting, machines beeping. I was alive. But I was not the same. The days that followed were the hardest of my life. How do you tell your community, your family, your students, that everything you taught about the Messiah was incomplete, even wrong? How do you say, "I saw Jesus"? For weeks I stayed silent, wrestling with fear. But the memory of that gaze, that truth, would not let me rest. Silence became unbearable. So I began to speak. First to my family. Then to a few trusted friends. At first they thought I was delirious, confused from medication. But I know what I saw. I know who I met. And as I spoke, something unexpected happened. Some wept. Some grew angry. Some walked away. But a few leaned closer, hungry for the truth. I told them what I am telling you now. That death is not the end. That Jesus is not just a figure in Christian theology, not just a name we dismiss in synagogue debates. He is the Messiah foretold, the one who carries both the weight of judgment and the flood of mercy. He is alive. He is real. You may be listening and shaking your head, thinking I've betrayed my heritage, thinking I've abandoned my people. I understand that reaction. I once would have thought the same. But listen carefully. This is not betrayal. This is fulfillment. The Messiah was always meant to be a stumbling block, a scandal, someone our pride would resist. That is exactly what Isaiah wrote, that we would see him and not recognize him. And yet he chose to come anyway, to lay down his life even for those who rejected him. The peace I feel now is something I never knew before. It is not the peace of performing rituals flawlessly, not the peace of debating texts until dawn. It is the peace of knowing him, of having been seen completely and still loved. of knowing that when my heart finally stops for the last time, I will not fall into darkness, but into his arms. I share this not to convince by force, but because silence would be cowardice. I know some of you will dismiss this testimony. Some will laugh. Some will hate me for it. But maybe, just maybe, someone listening right now needed to hear that the Messiah is real, that death is not the end, and that love stronger than death is waiting for you. And if this has stirred something in you, don't just scroll away. Stay with me on this journey. Subscribe, not because I want numbers, but because what I will share next will go even deeper. This is not something you'll hear on the news or in debates. It is something lived, something raw, something eternal. So click that button because what comes next will challenge everything you thought you knew. Let me end with this. That place between life and death stripped me bare. I saw the Messiah face to face, and he was not the conqueror of nations I expected. He was the conqueror of hearts. He was the one who takes brokenness and makes it whole. The one who turns death into a doorway. And when my final moment comes again, I will not fear. Because I know who waits for me. And I will spend the rest of my days telling anyone who will listen that the Messiah has come. His name is Jesus, and he is the truth we all long for, whether we admit it or not. So if your heart is burning right now, don't ignore it. Lean in. Explore. And stay connected here because together we are going to dive deeper into what this revelation means for our lives, our faith, and our future. Trust me, you don't want to miss what's coming. When I say this is only the beginning, I mean it in the deepest sense. Standing in that hospital bed after returning, I realized that one encounter with him is enough to fuel an entire lifetime of reflection. The moment I spoke his name in my heart, it was as if 1,000 pieces of my past were being rearranged. Every prayer I had ever uttered, every scripture I had ever memorized, suddenly took on a new meaning. Verses I had repeated mechanically in synagogue were now glowing with fire. The Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want. Those words were not poetry anymore, they were the reality of his presence. I had met the shepherd. Even the silence around him was full. Imagine a silence so dense, so alive, that it tells you more than 1,000 books. That is what I felt as he looked at me. His gaze did not only pierce my mind, it pierced my history. I could see flashes of my childhood, the days when I first opened the Torah and traced the Hebrew letters with trembling fingers. I remembered the pride of my parents when I first recited prayers flawlessly. And in that instant I also remembered the pressure, the weight of needing to be perfect, of performing faith rather than living it. His gaze showed me all of it in one sweep, not to humiliate me but to release me. And then, his light seemed to press deeper, reaching even into the doubts I never dared to voice. Every rabbi has them, though few admit it. In late nights of study, I used to stumble upon prophecies that felt inconvenient. Texts that pointed to a suffering Messiah, a rejected servant, a figure who didn't fit the victorious king mold. I would quickly gloss over them, tell myself I was misreading, or lean on centuries of commentaries that twisted those passages into something safer. But in that place, under his eyes, there was no twisting. I knew the truth. Every doubt I had buried rose like smoke, and every excuse evaporated in his presence. His voice had the texture of eternity, if that makes sense. It wasn't just words I heard, it was reality itself reshaping me. When he said, "The kingdom is within," I felt that kingdom open up like a hidden chamber in my chest. It was as if I had carried a locked door inside me all my life and he held the key. The lock clicked, the door swung open, and suddenly there was space, light, peace where before there had only been striving and fear. And yet, even as his truth flooded me, I felt the weight of responsibility pressing harder. Because knowing him was not meant to be a private revelation I could tuck away. His words were clear: you will go back. You will speak. That command carried both terror and privilege. To see him was indescribable, but to carry his message into the world, that was the true test. I realized then that this encounter was not simply about me. It was about generations of teaching, about centuries of expectation and misunderstanding. It was about every man and woman who had ever searched the scriptures with longing eyes, wondering when the Messiah would come. It was about every soul weighed down by ritual without life, law without love. And it was about him, always about him, waiting patiently for hearts to turn even after being rejected. That realization burned into me with almost unbearable intensity. It was as if he was saying, "This revelation is not a trophy for your soul. It is a seed. Plant it, speak it, let it grow." And in that eternal silence, I understood something I had never dared to believe. The Messiah was not late. He had never been late. He was always here. We were the ones who had closed our eyes. The light grew brighter around him, almost blinding but not painful. It felt like love pressing in from every angle, dismantling every defense I had. And within that light I saw something else, scars. Yes, even in glory his hands bore them. Marks that testified of suffering, of sacrifice, of love paid in full. And in that moment I knew beyond doubt, this was not a vision manufactured by my fading brain. This was not a hallucination born of medication. This was the risen one, the crucified and living Messiah, standing before me in undeniable truth. And as his presence enveloped me, I realized something even deeper. Every story I had read in Torah, every prophecy I had studied, every whisper of God throughout history, it all pointed here. It all pointed to him. Alive. That word feels too small for what he was. Life as I had known it on earth was fragile, dependent on breath, on heartbeat, on the delicate balance of a body that could so easily fail. But what radiated from him was not life as survival. It was existence in its purest, unstoppable form. To call him alive felt like calling the sun warm. It was true, but it barely scratched the surface. The very atmosphere around him seemed charged with that aliveness. Every flicker of light was not just illumination but pulse. Every vibration of silence was not emptiness but fullness. If eternity could be condensed into presence, that was what stood before me. It was so absolute that I began to feel my own being vibrate in resonance with him, as though even my soul had been waiting all along to tune itself to his frequency. Colors I cannot name shimmered in the space around him. Not colors like red or blue, but living hues, shades that carried emotion, truth, even memory within them. They shifted as he moved, flowing like water and flame at once. They weren't decoration. They were essence. And as they played across his scars, I understood. Those wounds were not only reminders of suffering, they were doorways. Each scar seemed to emit its own radiance, as though through the very places where the world had tried to break him, glory poured out uncontainable. Even the way the light touched me carried meaning. When it fell on my chest, it felt like forgiveness. When it brushed my face, it felt like truth. When it wrapped around me fully, it was love beyond language. Every inch of my being was being read and rewritten, yet without force, without violence, only with the irresistible gravity of compassion. I noticed that my body, if I even had one in that state, reacted differently to his nearness. My chest felt lighter, as if burdens I had carried since childhood simply dissolved. My hands tingled, as though every prayer I had ever raised was finally being answered in a single embrace. My vision sharpened, but not outwardly, internally. I was seeing myself not through my eyes but through his, and it was both terrifying and liberating. The sound, if one can call it that, was another mystery. There were no words being spoken in the human sense, yet his presence had tone, rhythm, harmony. It was like standing inside a song too vast to hear with ears, yet unmistakably there. At times, the resonance felt like thunder rolling quietly under everything. At others, it was like the gentlest whisper curling around my soul. And always it spoke the same truth: I am. Every scripture verse that had once seemed obscure now echoed in that song. Zechariah's words about the one they have pierced hummed through the light like a hidden chord finally unveiled. Daniel's vision of the Son of Man coming with the clouds didn't feel distant or symbolic anymore. It was right there, in flesh and radiance before me. The Torah stories of sacrifice and blood spilled for atonement no longer felt archaic. They were threads leading directly into the tapestry I now saw completed in him. And though my mind wanted to cling to those texts, to analyze, to dissect, his presence wouldn't let me stay in mere intellect. It drew me deeper, past the scholar, past the rabbi, past even the man of flesh and memory, into the raw core of soul itself. That was where he spoke, not with arguments but with being. The weight of his love pressed down and lifted me up all at once. It was heavy like truth, yet buoyant like mercy. It exposed me, but it did not destroy me. It demanded surrender, yet it gave more in return than I could ever have imagined. Alive, yes, but not just alive. He was life itself. Not a carrier of it, not a teacher of it, but its source, its fountain, its endless well. Standing before him was like standing at the very beginning of creation and realizing every breath that ever filled a lung, every heartbeat that ever began, had originated in him. And as I absorbed that, I understood with clarity deeper than words. Every longing, every prayer, every debate, every ritual, every silence of my life had been an echo, a shadow, a reaching hand. And now I had touched the hand it all reached for. The longer I remained in that state, the more I realized that his presence was not something external pressing in on me. It was as if the very fabric of reality was built from him. He was not standing inside the scene I was witnessing. He was the scene. The darkness, the light, the silence, the pulse of eternity, all of it existed because he held it together. Every flicker of radiance was not separate from him but flowing out of him like breath. It was then I understood why the prophet spoke of the Lord as both near and uncontainable, both immanent and transcendent. He was not one or the other. He was both perfectly simultaneously. I tried to hold on to thoughts the way I used to, linear, analytical, structured, but his nearness made thought itself expand. Ideas did not arrive like lines on a page but like waves crashing in fullness, surrounding me on all sides. In one instant I grasped the depth of sin, not as law-breaking but as distance from this love. In the next, I grasped atonement, not as ritual sacrifice, but as his very self-offering to close that distance forever. Each truth unfolded not in words, but in experience, undeniable because I was immersed in it. Even the way his scars glowed began to reveal dimensions I hadn't considered. They weren't just personal history, they were cosmic testimony. Each mark was a doorway of reconciliation, a point in space and time where heaven touched earth, where suffering was absorbed and transfigured into glory. As my gaze rested on them, I felt the weight of every argument I had once made crumble, every dismissal of Jesus as a distortion, every insistence that the Messiah would never suffer. Here was suffering transformed, not erased but exalted. Here was rejection turned into the cornerstone. The atmosphere itself seemed to respond to him. I felt currents moving around us, invisible yet undeniable. They were not winds, yet they carried weight, almost like the prayers of millions drifting through eternity, all converging toward him. Each current was a cry of humanity, sometimes desperate, sometimes grateful, sometimes angry, and all of them found their end in him. He was the meeting place, the convergence point where every plea was heard and every silence was answered. And then there was the rhythm, subtle but undeniable. My entire being began to sense it, like the heartbeat of creation itself. It was not my pulse, not the memory of my heart's rhythm back in the hospital bed. It was deeper, wider, uncontainable. Every living thing seemed tied to it, every breath of wind, every birth, every death. It pulsed with three truths that were beyond debate: he is, he was, he will be. My own body, or soul, or whatever form I occupied in that state, reacted in ways I had no language for. There was warmth in me as if his nearness was fire, yet I was not consumed. There was expansion like I had been living in a cramped cell and suddenly the walls had fallen away into infinite space. There was rest so profound I could almost forget fear had ever existed. Every muscle of spirit, every nerve of memory, every hidden fragment of self finally exhaled. And the scriptures, oh the scriptures, they lit up like constellations across the night sky of my mind. The suffering servant of Isaiah was not just prophecy, it was portrait. The pierced one of Zechariah was not allegory, it was encounter. The Son of Man in Daniel was not symbol, it was person. The psalms I had sung since boyhood now sang back to me, alive, fulfilled. The Lord said to my Lord, sit at my right hand. I had recited it countless times, but now I saw it, embodied in the one before me. Every line I had once dissected with ink and commentary now breathed with flesh and light. The silence stretched, but it was not absence. It was invitation. Every second of it carried weight, as if he was giving me space to see, to absorb, to let go of the scaffolding of my arguments and simply behold. I realized that what he offered was not merely correction of doctrine but transformation of vision. He wasn't demanding that I abandon my heritage. He was showing me its fulfillment, its culmination, its heartbeat. In that unbroken moment I understood, all of history bent toward him. Every ritual, every feast, every law, every prophecy, they were signposts pointing here. And the tragedy was that we had been staring at the signs, memorizing their shapes, debating their directions and never arriving at the destination. And now here he was, undeniable, unavoidable, irresistible.